Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this sketching workshop that's going to be led by Spencer Nugent. We're so happy to have Spencer here doing this for us. If you don't know me, my name is Jack. I'm president of RIT IDSA. And we've got Liam here. Liam, do you want to wave? Hi. From IDSA. So we're really glad to have such good turnout. And we're just going to hand it straight over to Spencer to get started on things. And if you have any questions, you can shout them out or put them in the chat if you want. He'll be reading those. So Spencer, why don't you take it away?
All right, thanks. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Spencer Nugent. I draw a lot of stuff online. I've been an industrial designer primarily in my career for almost 20 years now. So it's been a minute. I'm starting to be one of those old guys who still draws stuff on paper. So that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna draw on paper. Some of you, I don't know what your skill level is, but I'm gonna assume that we're running the gamut here from inexperienced to somewhat experienced. But that being said, it's still important to understand the fundamentals and basics. So I'm gonna teach you some important things using some simple examples that I think will translate to whatever medium or exercise you're using. So the power of a cube, we're gonna talk about lighting, and then we'll wrap things up with one demo sketching an actual product. So while I'm doing the introductory stuff, I want you guys to think about whether you'd like to see something like a car, shoe, I think I have a hair dryer, headphones, or if there's another product that you'd like to see, feel free to post that up in the chat, or Jack, if you want to run a poll, you can do that as well. All right, so I'm going to switch over here to my overhead. So first things first, I always warm up when I sketch. Even though I have experience drawing, super important. All right, so I start out by drawing some straight lines. And it may be hard to tell here just because of the zoom of the camera, but really it's about drawing with your shoulders. So I'm using my shoulder and my elbow as pivots and trying to lock my wrist as much as possible. Now there's exceptions to that situation where I may not want to lock my wrist. However, for the most part, particularly with industrial design sketching, I try to draw with my shoulder, and warm-ups are super important. So when I was a student, I would draw several pages like this, just straight lines, as straight as I could get. This one seems pretty good, until I felt warm enough. I would sit, watch TV. This is before Netflix was really a thing, and just draw lines. So if it takes more than one page, that's totally fine. It's totally okay. Just push yourselves and see how straight a line you can get. Now, there's some characteristics of these lines I want you to try and notice. It might be hard to see here on the screen, so I'll zoom in. Now, if you notice at the beginning or end of the lines, there's a little bit of thickness right here. We go thin and then back to thick, okay? So this is a result of the speed at which you sketch. So the faster you sketch, right, there's a ramp up, if you will. As I'm accelerating, here I am, constant speed, and then I decelerate. So it naturally gives some characteristic to the line. So pay attention to how you draw and the characteristics you're going to get with your line. The other thing is, oh, I forgot to mention actually at the beginning of the presentation, the person who actually taught me to sketch went to RIT for their master's. So it's an honor to be showing you guys some stuff, throwing it back to you, I guess. All right, so next I'm going to do some circles. All right, to do the circles, I just want to kind of think of, I guess I'm a little bit warm already, but I'm trying to avoid the overlaps, okay? I'm trying to avoid these overlaps. So this one's pretty good, but also paying attention to, okay, am I creating something that feels equidistant from a point here, right, as I draw my circles. As I'm doing this, what I'm trying to do as well is ghost over the paper. So you'll see, if you were standing over my shoulder, you'd see me do this before actually touching down on the paper. And then when I'm ready, I can touch down and draw that circle. All right, so something else to kind of think about, pay attention to as you're trying to do this. In terms of the size of these circles, I typically shoot for 2 to 3 inches in diameter, right? And that's going to be, at least for me, big enough that I feel like I'm actually working my shoulder. The bigger you draw, the better in reality, because you can actually use a little trick. And let me know if you guys can hear me okay. That should sound a little better. Um, you can use a little trick when you draw bigger, and that is if you shrink your sketch ever so slightly, like 20%, it's actually going to look that much better. So don't tell anyone I told you that, but it is a little cheap. Okay, so there is my circle. We'll come back to this in just a sec. The next exercise I like to do personally, there's many things you can do to warm up. I'll show you this one real quick. So if you draw a series of parallel lines as best you can warm up with your ellipses. All right, so ellipses are important in product design, as you may be aware of, maybe not. Again, I'm not really sure of the skill level here. I'm assuming some of you are freshmen, yeah, sophomores, juniors. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about ellipses as well when we get to our form segment here. But as I'm warming up, I'm trying to create a series of ellipses. These are a little bit smaller than the circles I was creating. Granted, if I want to, I could also draw bigger ellipses, but the idea being I'm trying to create a progression of these ellipses such that I change the degree ever so slightly as I move down the page. Now, it doesn't matter if they overlap. My goal is to see if I can come up with a progression of these ellipses. All right, I'll have to do another page because I don't usually do them that big, but just wanted to show you that you can do them big as well. Here, and this is perhaps a bit of my own laziness, I'm not as concerned about the accuracy start and stop of these shapes, but that's something you can work on if you choose to. All right, another way to do these is also by doing converging lines. We do a lot of converging lines when we do perspective drawing, so understanding how to do that can be beneficial. So as you're warming up, we can do ellipses like so. All right, just progressively and opening up the ellipse. When I say open up, I'm really talking about this dimension here in the ellipse. All right, we'll analyze this, talk a little bit about ellipses, how to draw them, and make them look good in a little bit, but another exercise you can do. All right, so you might be wondering, why are you drawing just ellipses? I came here to see some cool stuff. I came to see dragons and cars and robots. All right, well, it's all about understanding the building blocks of form, okay? So anything that's created by humans tends to have some rationality to it. That's just how we are. So by rationality, I mean basic geometry, okay? Or some reason to that form, perhaps with the exception of the PlayStation 5, but just kidding. There is some rationality to the things that we create and the forms that we generate. So as I'm warming up here, all right, just working on these ellipses, I'll show you the benefit of drawing these. If you watch my YouTube channel at all, which I'll drop a link in the channel for you guys, as well as some information on the tools I use, and I'll talk about that in just a sec. But as we draw this, I'll show you why. Let me just finish a normal page here for you. All right, so I've got my ellipses here. I could draw a line straight through these. Again, my goal here was to get this nice proportional relationship, 50-50, half and half. I could take a couple of these ellipses, say this one, and 2, 3, 4, and this one here. All right, just throw a couple lines in, and I'm going to take 1, 2, 3. I'm going to take an ellipse here, draw a line up, over like so, maybe some shape like this, finish this out, and add a couple lines in here like so. And before you know it, you've drawn your first car. So as you're warming up, right, don't get too frustrated thinking, oh man, why am I doing this again? This sucks. I hate this. Because really you're laying the building blocks of being able to draw some pretty exciting and interesting things. As long as you realize those connections, it becomes that much easier to do. All right. Now, this isn't exactly how I would draw a car, but I'm just showing you the power of understanding at least how these ellipses work, warming up, and that you can use this for something if you had to draw a car, for example. If I had to draw, say, a water bottle or something, right? I've been practicing this progression of ellipses. You know, if I want to draw some canteen or something, like so, and maybe a little curve like this, I could draw another ellipse at an angle, and now I've got a little spout here, and could even use this ellipse as a drop shadow. So now, real quick, just like that, I have some concept sketch of a bottle, right? So practicing in this way helps you establish, I think, the right perspective, no pun intended, on the progression of these shapes, right? But understanding the why is going to enable you to know how to approach your drawings. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about why. Sorry, I ran out of paper. So we'll talk a little bit about the why. All right. Okay, so let me think here. Perspective, I'm going to assume that you guys understand 1, 2-point, 3-point perspective, at least the basics of why things are the way they are. In reality, we actually see things in a 5-point perspective, but we're not going to touch on that here. We'll just assume that all vertical lines are actually straight and not slightly curved. That being said, if I were to sketch a form, something like a cube, right? It's actually a powerful tool that we can use. I did say I would mention materials, so let me actually back up just a little bit and mention that. And I should warn you, my brain is kind of a sieve, so I tend to forget things along the way. So if I forget something, feel free to, if I mention something and then you're like, oh, he said he was going to cover that, he didn't, just let me know and I'll be happy to go back. All right. So just real quick, if you're looking to improve your skill and get better at drawing, I highly, highly recommend using a pen that doesn't forgive and a pen that doesn't forget. So something of a felt pen or Sharpies, that kind of thing. Something that's not going to allow you to hesitate while drawing. It's going to feel difficult, feel uncomfortable, but when you're a little bit more conscious about how you're drawing, then it's going to force you to be a little bit more careful, right? And also develop your confidence. So we'll start with something like a cube, and then we'll progress as we go. All right, so a couple of things you want to pay attention to with your cube drawings as we do these. My cheap markers here. All right, so I'm trying to pay attention to the convergence of these lines. So I can tell the bottom of my cube is actually a little bit off. So even myself, someone who draws a lot, like I have to practice these things, right? So in drawing this cube, you definitely want to pay attention to, okay, are these lines converging or do they appear to converge? I think my left side was better than my right side, right there. But with this cube, we can do a lot of things, right? If I take a square, for example, like so, and I want to get another square, I can actually extend the baseline out, mark the midpoint on this line, project a line through, and I now have another square, right? And I can do this all the way down like so, and just kind of estimate proportionally. Super useful if you're doing something like, hey, I need to figure out proportionally how many wheels I want in this vehicle, right? In perspective, because here I can actually do the same thing. I can extend this midpoint line out, draw through these 2 points, and now I have another square in perspective. So if you ever struggle with estimating your perspective, this is certainly one way to do that. All right. I typically draw in a 3-point perspective. So 2-point being the main difference between those two being the vertical lines in a 3-point perspective converging to a common point. So all these lines should appear to converge at some point off the page. All right. The reason, just as a side note, the reason I say it's more of a 5-point perspective is that, and I'll send you scans of all of these pages, by the way. So, is we have a left, right vanishing point. Okay. If we look up, things appear to converge. If we look down, things appear to converge. And if we look straight ahead, things appear to converge. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. And so in reality, your perspective system is more like this. Okay. So we just, when we're drawing anyways, we just assume, hey, all these lines are straight, but in reality, they're slightly curved. All right, but that's neither here nor there. Just explaining to you guys a little bit more about reality and how things are. So even when I sketch, sometimes I'll curve the lines intentionally to help them feel a little bit more of an approximation of a 5-point perspective. All right, so back to our little friend, the cube. From a cube, we can do a few things, okay? So let's get the top here, the bottom. And what I'm doing on the backside here is I'm drawing through, okay? So it just means that I am looking at the form here and drawing the backside, right? So I can kind of do a gut check. I can check against how I've constructed this and say, oh, okay, these look like they all converge to the same point, right? So it's a good way to check if you just draw the backside. Let's see, Jack's wondering who the RIT grad. His name's Paul Skaggs. That's who I learned from. Okay, so if I can draw a circle, just like I did in my warm-ups, and I want to put this circle in perspective, I can actually draw a square around my circle, like so. Okay, and when I draw my circle, or a square rather, around my circle, I can also divide it into 4 parts. And you may notice that we have 4-point tangency on these lines. In addition to that, I can draw corner to corner, like so. And we can also establish a relationship with the diagonals in square. Okay, that's cool, but hey, I can actually translate this to the top of my square now, or top of my cube, because it is a square. So I can draw corner to corner, which is important because that actually gives me the midpoint here in perspective. Now draw a line like so, and one like so. And as I evaluate my system here, you may notice, maybe not, okay, we've got those points of tangency. I can mark those right here, just like so. And right on the diagonals, we have this intersection point. Well, it so happens that it's roughly a third. Okay, it's not exactly a third, but for the purposes of evaluating and moving quickly here, we're just going to assume that it is a curve. All right. Or sorry, we're going to assume that's a third, not a curve. So I can mark, on these lines, my estimation of a third as I would perceive it in 3-dimensional space, so something like that. And now with my red pen here, I can connect these points. All right, so we now have something of an ellipse in perspective. All right, if I do the same thing on the bottom, like so, I'm just gonna move quickly and guesstimate here, but I would have something like so as well. Just gonna keep that rough. And then if I connect these 2 points, I now have a cylinder. So if you can draw a cube, you can draw a cylinder. You might be thinking, well, cool, what else can I draw with a cube? Well, if I, instead of connecting to the sides here, if I draw to the point, I now have a cylinder, right? If I also, running out of colors here, let's see, let's use orange. If I draw from the corners of my cube up, like so, I have a pyramid, right? So you can draw a lot of things if you can draw a cube. Well, what of a sphere? How would you draw a sphere? Well, a sphere in perspective is really just a circle, but the reason behind the rhyme here, or rhyme behind the reason, either way, is that we have a cube and we have planes. in that cube, right? So I can divide this cube like so. You can also divide it like so. And this is all an approximation. If you take the time to actually construct this more accurately, it should line up. All right, so we've got, just so I can show you, one plane here, right? We've got another plane here. And I'm trying to think, oh, and another plane here. Cool. So if I were to draw ellipses on all these planes, okay, I would end up with something like this, and like this. And if I were to then draw curves tangent to all of these ellipses, I end up with my sphere. So instead of constructing a sphere, we just draw a circle. But it's also important to understand the nature of that sphere, because how we cut that thing at any angle can tell us a lot about how to shade it. All right. So I'm going to move ahead, if you have any questions so far, to a bit more on form and lighting. All right. So we understand a bit of how some of these simple forms are. Let's see. I'm on a schedule here. All right. I've got 7 minutes. I'll show you some stuff. Let's do some primitive shading, and then we'll jump into the actual product sketching. So let me know. Again, I don't know if you want to run a pole jack, but you know, transportation, you want to see a computer mouse, something organic and perhaps challenging that you might not have an approach to. I'll show you how to even break it down and sketch that using some of these techniques.
If anyone has something, just post it in the chat and we'll just pick one at the end. Whatever is most interesting.
Yeah, in about 10 minutes, we'll shift over to that segment. All right, so let's just draw some primitives real quick here. So we got one box. And perspective is probably going to be a little janky on these because I'm trying to move a little quickly. All right, 2, and then 3. And then I'll do some cylinders for you as well. Oh yes, Bruce. He did work at Keck. I applied for an internship at Keck at one point. Okay, so we've got some shapes here, and for the sake, I'm working on a marker information guide, so that'll be on my website soon. You can always catch my YouTube, of course. There's a link for you guys. But I'm using 3 grays. Okay, so I'm using Copic markers. C2, C4, and C6. They're approximately 20% different in value. And when I'm lighting an object, like a cube or product or anything, it's important to consider the relative position of the light to the object. That's going to tell you a lot about how to shade it. So if I have a box like this, cube, or not a cube, but a box, and if I were to draw a big ellipse here and mark some tick points on here, right? I could pick my light to be here. I could pick my light to be here. I could pick it here, here, in fact. But this is going to tell me a lot about, okay, which way do I cast my shadow? Okay, what's going to be the lightest surface on this object? So I'm thinking about these things, the relative position of the light, whether I'm doing a car or mouse, shoe, anything like that. It's important to understand, okay, where's the light? What's this potential environment like? If you've used an app like Keyshot, you can learn a lot actually about how to light things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my lightest marker here, my C2, and shade the top. And I'm aligning the edge of the marker such that it's collinear with these lines. Okay, so just a little rotation there. I also try to work light until I get it right. Okay, so I'm going to shade down like so, and then we can also fill in this back surface if you want to. Now I can build value. I can jump to my C4 because the light is, let's say, up here somewhere, casting rays, right? This is going to be my lightest surface. Of these two surfaces, however, which do you guys think would be the dark? Is it going to be A or B? You can type, shout out, whatever. All right, A is going to be the lighter. It's actually B. B is going to be lighter than A. Okay, so I'm going to save A for my dark marker, which is going to be my C6. So I'm going to take the C4 now and just shade down the front like so. All right. This isn't what I would consider to be traditional marker rendering because I'm not really being as precise as I would be with A. Oh, A being the darkest. Okay, fine, fair enough. You guys are all right. I'm not being as precise as I would be with the real marker rendering. This is just abbreviated marker just to show you guys how to apply these markers. All right, so this is a pretty flat shading of my marker. Okay, what actually happens, however, and this is going to move a little bit into lighting dynamic. I'm going to steal some time from the next demo that I do, but I do need to show you guys this. So a little simple setup here. If I have a plane like so on a surface, okay, and if you take a minute to even look around the room that you're in, you'll notice that the walls, okay, they're not just one consistent value or tone. They have dynamic to them. And that happens for a few reasons, but as I sketch, I like to think of it this way. So if the light's here, it's going to hit this surface. Just physically, there's a property that's such that if light hits a surface, okay, at a certain point, like so, that's called the angle of incidence. It's equal to the angle of reflection. Super important, but I'm not going to get into the weeds here. I would need a couple hours to explain this to you, but super helpful if, as you're doing curved surfaces even, and trying to figure out reflections, things like that. But think of it this way. Light hits this surface, it's going to reflect back into this one here. So assuming the surface this plane is resting on, surface B, all right, we've got surface A. Surface A is going to pick up reflected light from that surface. So I'll shade these with two markers here. So you can see this is C2 real quick. And if I take the C4 and I was shading this surface, what I would actually do is create somewhat of a gradient. Okay. So as I move to the bottom, maybe skip a couple marker strokes there. And then now that this is dry, hit it again. And now we end up with a bit more dynamic shading on this surface, right? Implying that there is indeed some reflected light, okay? And let's just throw in a generic shadow behind this to give this some depth and presence. So think of sketching as, hey, how can I symbolically represent things in real life using the limited tool set that we have? It's not about photorealism, but rather expressing a sense of reality. Okay, so let's call this matte, right? And then let's do shiny. And then we'll, or wait, matte, I'll just say shinier. I need to think of a better word. I guess it's I technically. And then we'll do gloss, chrome. So the shinier something gets, the less diffusion will happen with the light. Okay, so this, for example, is assuming the surface has no undulations. If the surface has undulations like this, what actually happens is light will hit a certain point on the surface. We draw a line that's tangent to the surface at that point. We draw a normal and then figure out, oh shoot, the light bounces back to us. If the light hits here, for example, that's our tangent line. We have normal. We'll assume the light rays are all parallel as well, just for simplicity. Okay. So wow, we've got one light ray bouncing back toward me, the viewer, and we've got one going away. So that's how light scatters, right? Think of it that way with your surfaces. So with something that is shiny or has a smooth surface, we're going to have a nice, consistent bounce, predictable outcomes, right? When things curve, for example, that's when we get distortions happening as well. All right. So moving to shinier, here's where I might change my approach. I'm going to switch to, well, I'll do these in gray and then I'll switch to a color because my C2 here seems to be drying out. So on the shinier, now I have to consider, okay, what's in the environment? What's happening with my surface? So let's say, for example, this cube is resting on a table like that. What does that mean? Or some things in the environment. Maybe Jack's standing back here, or some silhouette looking at this cube. We've got let's see, pick some other names. Apurv is standing over here, for example, right? What does that mean? Well, I'll use this this human on that example. Apurv. Okay. So if I shade this with the C2, I have to think, okay, if there's a light above, what if that light's actually reflecting into the top of the cube, right? So sometimes with marker sketching, you'll see people do something like that, okay? Change the angle of the stroke. Those white little glints are meant to express, hey, something above is reflecting in. Now on this front surface, I'm going to switch to a C4, okay? Like so, and even as I do this, I may change my stroke a little bit, like so. Couple of things as well. Notice that at this point, we have light against dark, right? Or lightest lights against your darkest darks. That's going to give you a sense of contrast. Again, if you look in the room, I can see it behind Jack's head in his video. There's that corner, and you can see the difference in contrast with those walls. Now, this is a simplification of that, but having that contrast helps your forms read better. All right. So now I'm going to go 60% on the side here. All right, so maybe that's a little bit shinier. We're getting some things reflecting into our cube and so forth. You know, maybe this silhouette over here is kind of reflecting in. All right, so we can do stuff like that. So next, what if it's gloss and chrome? Well, as it's gloss and chrome, now I've got to consider the whole environment. All right, there's likely a situation. I'll go ahead and do this reflection in here. Actually, figure out midpoint. Actually, the reflection is going to be more like right there, but just ignore my little mistake. What you actually need to do is pick the distance to this person and then flip it. So this, even showing this little sliver here is a cheat, but I'm doing it just to show you guys. But for example, if the edge of some table were right here and everything else in this environment is black, for example, we're going to get some of that reflecting back into the shape. So I pick this distance here, flip it in, draw this line like so, and then fill in the environment above, okay, which looks and perhaps feels a little bit weird, but you're really just drawing the reflection of what you see. Now on top, assuming again the environment's black, so if it's like a dark studio and you've got like a nice fluorescent light above, you may even see something like this happening on the top of your object. Okay, on this side, same thing. If it's black, you get the edge of that table or whatever surface it's on. You're going to start to get things like that happening. Now, this is a pretty high contrast example, but meant to show, hey, as this thing progressively gets to a mirror-like finish, you know, you may throw some cool gray on top like this. Right, but getting comfortable with that contrast is going to help you communicate that surface quality. All right, so I'm going to jump to a cylinder here. Got no comments on, let's see, an ergonomic forehead thermometer. Yeah, I could do that. Electric shaver. All right, so shaver or thermometer, those are the two options we're going to look at. And I think I will go over on time today, but it's okay, like I mentioned. All All right, so with a cylinder, it's a little bit trickier. I usually go a little bit more in depth on this, but really you just want to think about two things. Um, there's going to be a shadow core and then a highlight, okay, as we draw and shade this. Let's see, 3 minutes. Could I do this in 3 minutes? Maybe 1 minute. All right, so if I have a cylinder, I'm looking at it from the front here, like so, and let's rotate a bit, and this is now the top of the cylinder. Let's say I have a light bulb here, and I am evaluating the cylinder looking this way, okay? The ability to see something is light reflecting off that thing and entering our eye, right? So if light, for example, is coming this way, we'll draw a couple light rays, some past the object. As light passes the object, okay, this is going to be in darkness, right? And as we approach this edge, without showing you all the light rays, right, this is going to appear to be darker because as light hits these surfaces and this tangency changes, eventually you're going to get this kind of fall off, right? So that's what creates that fall off on a cylinder. At a certain point, however, let's see, where would that be? Be here, might be here. You're going to get essentially a concentration of light rays that hit your eye. And then these will diffuse and so forth. Some of these will bounce back, right? So this is what creates essentially your highlight. And this is what's going to create your shadow core, at least in this example, just a shadow. The core being created by the fact that there is ambient light in the scene as well, right? So in a front view, and this is pretty typical how you shade a cylinder, you're going to get your shadow core and then highlight somewhere here. The position of these just depends on the orientation of your light. If your light's here as opposed to here, right? It's just going to affect the position of these bands as well as the width. Well, the width being perhaps more determined by the surface undulations or smoothness. Okay. All right, so back to our little framework here. I'll show you how to do a matte cylinder, shinier, and then super glossy. Okay, so for the matte, I'm going to start with my lightest lights. I'm using a blue-green 11 marker here. Start with your lightest lights. All right, just going to leave a spot for highlight, and then just create my blend around like so. On the top, I'm actually going to shade such that I create a little bit of a gradient going back. And that's so I can establish some nice contrast up front. It's not entirely accurate, but I tend to prioritize contrast over sometimes the realism. Okay, so shadow core, hit that twice, and now I can kind of create a blend moving forward on this marker. And oftentimes I'll just bounce between markers. So as I do the sketch demo and use some of these abbreviated techniques to create different finishes, something like a shaver is good because we can do some chrome, we can do some shinier stuff, we can do some matte and show some materials as well. Or we could do that thermometer as well. Both, we could do the same thing with both. All right, so just creating this little blend here. And the less stripy the marker is, the better approximation of a matte surface you'll get, and the less white areas. So I'm just trying to create a nice blend here. Okay, I've got these three. Now I can use my 15, BG 15, which should be darker. All right. Little tip with Copic markers, by the way, if you're interested in markers, one, they're expensive, but two, I do believe in buying it nice or buying it twice. In other words, they're great. The colors and the reproduction consistency is spot on. No, they don't sponsor me to say any of this. I've just tried a lot of markers and spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars on markers and tools. So trying to save you some money. You may notice, for example, this is a BG 11, 13, and 15. Even though the cap color is different, what I'm looking for, okay, so we've got BG, X, Y. So as long as the X that first number is the same. This could be Z, this could be 3, right? I know these will all work together, okay, as long as that first number is okay. And the value change happens with that second number. So this number right here is value. All right, so it makes it real easy. I can just jump into my set of markers and just pick whatever I want, and I just know they'll work together. That's how I was able to just grab these and just go. All right, so a little bit shinier here. You're gonna get more banding, okay, in the presentation of the colors. So start with the lightest light, which in my case is this 11. And now I'm gonna jump to, let's jump to my 13, not 15. Okay, and I may have a nice crisp shadow core, something like that. You may start to get a little banding. Okay, now remember, as you add things like banding, it's not just about randomly putting things there, but rather thinking, hey, what in the environment could be causing these lines? Okay, is Jack standing here again, right? Or do we have someone standing on this side? Okay, that's what these artifacts are really trying to show, is that there's stuff in the environment that's reflecting in. I may even take a little bit darker marker as well. Surfaces that are more matte, less shiny, are going to have less contrast, okay, as well. So increase contrast as you go. Oh, my camera looks blown out today. Oops. And just hit that again. I should also mention I am using marker paper, and that just means that, do I have a refill on this? I hope I do. That just means that my markers won't bleed through to the next page. So in addition to having the colors look nice, you can also save money by using marker paper. So it's like, oh man, I got to spend more money, but you're actually saving money. Okay, something that's gloss. Sometimes I'll use my airbrush, but I don't have time for that today. So let's see if we can get something here. So to show gloss, I'm actually going to start with this dark marker, right? And just as we move to the side here, and just kind of hit and have a nice crisp line. I may skip a line like so. Okay. And now on this side, we'll create a little bit of gradient with the lightest marker that I have here. Okay, something like that. And then on the top, again, I've got to think about what's in the environment. It's a flat surface. In fact, this one I could probably add just a couple little streaks on the top. Okay, I got to think about the environment here. Hey, is it dark? And if it is there maybe a light up above? And if it's dark, I may go a bit darker with how I shade this top surface. All right, so might feel uncomfortable. Okay, but these are symbols or abbreviations, if you will, for those natural phenomena. All right. So there is an example of cylinder. We don't have time for me to show you a sphere or the curved objects, but we can apply some of these principles in how I do this, the quick sketch of something like thermometer or shaver. All right, so let's see. What shall we do, guys? You let me know, or I'll let Jack pick. In the meantime, David's asking, how often do I actually draw? I actually was drawing this morning. And experimenting. I like to experiment with new techniques, something I haven't done before, but just playing with shadows, silhouettes to show form, and using high contrast, for example. But I do draw every single day, at least one thing. Can I compare drawing products in 2-point and 3-point? Pros and cons. I don't really have to show per se, but I'll show you maybe perhaps something simple here. And it's so hard for me to do this because there. Whew, it's just hard. I have to like think really hard about it. But let's say we had some USB, I don't know, accessory or something. All right, we could just do a little fig Newton shape with a little core. All right, so this is 2-point perspective. And then 3-point would be something more like this. This is exaggerated, but let's go ahead and add these corners, rounds. All right, so this one's gonna feel a bit more dynamic, okay, because we do have this taper. This one feels more static, but perhaps approachable. So even the type of perspective you use in your sketch can give your sketch a certain mood, if you will, right? So I can add some color in here if I want. Like this to me feels less aggressive than this perspective. So sometimes even on a product presentation, you might want to consider the point of view at which you show an object, as that can sometimes set the mood or stage for how your design or sketch or thing is perceived, right? And as you know, humans, we are emotional beings, creatures. So it is not outside the realm of possibility that our emotional reaction to seeing something does influence that choice. Okay. So as a designer, you are in control of how you present those things. But here's an example of 2-point versus 3-point perspective for you guys. All right, Jack, what are we going to sketch?
Well, and I was very drawn to the egg chair suggestion. Thank
Egg,
you for that.
the
But
egg chair.
yeah, but I think an electric razor would be something fun.
Okay.
Something a bit you can play around with a bit more than something that's defined. So
All right, sounds good. Akachi's asking, how do you prevent burnout from my sketch a day? I've had times of burnout in my life. I try to make sure I rest sometimes. Sometimes I don't. I haven't rested for the last 3 weeks, really. Just been super busy, but I do try to rest where I can. Okay, so there's a couple ways I like to approach sketching, but ultimately it rolls up to this idea of form, divide, and 3, beautify. Also, as I do this workshop, I'm realizing there's so much stuff I wish I could tell you, but we just don't have time. Things like, hey, how do you hold your pen? You may have noticed I hold my pen fairly high up the barrel. That allows me to see what I'm drawing, right? I can see past the tip as opposed to drawing like this. It's a lot harder for me to see and anticipate where I'm drawing. Also, by backing off the tip, it actually helps my lines personally. You guys can try this, but helps them feel looser. And I can do things like, even though I said don't draw with your wrist, but I can swing with my wrist and get a nice curve if I want to, almost like a compass. All right, but maybe we'll use this line. So shaver, I'm trying to think. Let's do something, we could do 2 lines like this, you curve like so, and kind of establish our perspective. So when sketching an organic form, a couple things I like to do is think about, okay, what are the rational geometry parts that I can use? You can work light until you get it right, or when in doubt, rough it out. Those are 2 approaches I take. Okay, so if I know the shaver has a head, for example, I might start by roughing it out. Okay, like so, just rough lines, because I can always do an overlay. Now I got to think, all right, if someone's holding this thing, what is an appropriate shape for them to hold? All right, maybe it's some sort of ellipsoid. All right, and I won't get into the geometry behind this, but really I said I won't, but it's really just 3 spheres. Okay, and then you draw the overlap of those spheres. So now that I have this shape, I can do something like, okay, maybe I'll just connect like so. All right, And like I said, I know someone has to hold this thing. So let's draw a section of this ellipsoid, right? I'm just cutting it with my imaginary laser eyes, like so. And now I need to transition to this surface. Well, this is where I think sometimes CAD can come in handy because it helps you understand, I think, how you can go about sketching something, because I'm essentially using a process here that I would use when I do my CAD model. All right, so now I can add my fillet. So that first step of form is really just roughing out the whole thing. Divide refers to things like adding fillets, or it might be, hey, I actually need to cut this now. You know, I want to change the angle here. So I can cut that, round it up like so. I don't even know what kind of shaver this is. Maybe we'll just assume it's one of those dual thing men shavers. I don't use these, but I assume you guys meant electric shaver. All right, so let's offset these, and now I can kind of figure out the form here. All right, now as this transitions, you might be like, oh man, how do I transition that? Well, I don't really need to worry about that line, because when I do my overlay, I'm not gonna have that line. We can feather that out. All right, so right here, let's go ahead and now cut this line back like so. Cut this back like so, and then we'll use some of these shading techniques that I covered on this thing. All right, I can also think about, all right, as we move from a straight line here to a more curved line, okay, there's going to be a progression in terms of the cross section. So if I wanted to add a part line here, for example, I know it's going to be curved more than that, but not as much as this, for example. If I want to add some control, I'm trying to think, would the control be on the front? I don't know, but I do want to show some control. So I'll just, now on the divide portion, we'll get to beautify when we do the marker. But here, I can just rough in some little button. Whether or not this is actually how it would be, this is how I would go about sketching it, all right? And maybe this part intersects. So I'm thinking about, okay, what's the part line, the part breakup? These lines, these contour lines are meant to just guide me as I sketch. All right, so I may start with something like this. And let's go ahead and just rough in a background. Now at this point, yeah, you could take this and go digital with it if you wanted, to add those colors and clean up and so forth, but we'll do this using marker. This portion here, and I think I'll just borrow this line even. Kind of like that. Borrow a line here. Maybe this is some sort of grip thing. And then this I can make rubber, and this I'll make plastic, and this I'll do chrome. I had a question. I heard something. Maybe not. All right. So now I'm going to do what's called redrawing. Okay. So that just means that I'm going to use this as an underlay and quickly sketch over. Let's see. A couple questions here. All right, we're good. What airbrush and compressor do I use? I'm using an Iwata air compressor. I think we'll have time to do some airbrush stuff on this one. So perhaps when we get to these top foils. All right, so now I'm just gonna resketch, okay, which means I'm sketching quickly, all right, and I'm using what I did before as a guide, but I'm not slowly tracing over these lines, okay? Because my goal is to make sure that my new sketch has the right energy and excitement. But I also don't have to stress about, oh man, did I get the perspective right? Is my part break in the right spot? okay, because I already figured all of that out. I do tend to sketch a little bit looser, but even if you're sketching tighter, okay, you'll still want to move as quickly as you're comfortable with. And that's gonna just make sure your sketch has some good energy to it. All right, I just introduced a little bit of a undulation here in that line. Okay, so now I'll just continue this out like so. Okay. And again, just paying attention to how I'm holding the pen. Because that gives me the ability to see past what I'm doing here. All right, so there I have my quick lines on my shaver here. So let's pick some materials. I think this one I'll do is chrome. You know, this will be some sort of steel or metal. I think I'm gonna do rubber or some elastomer. And then we'll do plastic. I think I'll do gloss. All right. So first thing I'm going to focus on is the value shading. And since my cool grade 2 is drying up, let's see if I have another one. I do not, which is crazy. I thought I'd have another one. All right, so I'm going to do 3, 5, 7 on this guy. It's also fine. So here, again, I have to think about my light source. And I'm going to assume my light source is coming from the top right, which means toward the top surface. Let's remove this. Gets a little confusing when the paper gets a little saturated. So toward the top here, right, toward this point, I'm going to have my highlight. Okay, so I can do something like this for my highlight. As we move away from the light, we will have our shadow core. So I know I'm going to be a bit more shadowed toward the front here. For example, okay, I'm also anticipating that there's some reflected light in this scene. The surfaces on the side are going to be a bit darker as well. I think I'll do the chrome last. So let's start with the plastic. We'll use our greens that we had, our blue green 13, 15, 11, and I think 18 for our plastic. So on the plastic itself, again, I'm trying to imagine, all right, this is a scene. Maybe there's, you know, some person standing over here. We've got lights set up right over here. We've got stuff in the room. All of those things are going to be kind of reflecting back into this. But there's also our lighting. But that being said, still start with your lightest light. All right, on the bottom here, because it's more of a matte surface, I'm just going to go ahead and fill in with the marker like so. And I know I didn't cover spheres, but fortunately for you, I have videos on that on my YouTube. But essentially, you can kind of think of it like the shadow core on a cylinder being wrapped. If I were to pinch the bottom of that cylinder to a point and then have it such that it's a curve, not a straight line, we would get something like this happening on those shadow cores. All right. So for the gloss portion here, I'm going to have some intense reflections like so. Skip little spots. Maybe something like that. Okay, so a little bit different shading than we have here on the bottom. That's meant to be more of a textured plastic. In fact, you can also change the way we fill this in with the marker, just to create the impression that, hey, this is actually a textured surface. Something like that. We'll still use our 3 markers to shade that in. All right. On the midsection here, I think I'm just going to do gray. So let's go ahead and get this in. So here, right, we've got our nice reflections happening on the side. Maybe something happening here and on this far side. That's with my 18, so I'm going to jump to the 15. All right, create some secondary reflection lines here, and then let's jump to 13. Finish out our blend. Maybe something like that. And since I started with 11 there, I can take the 13, and instead of just drawing a nice, neat shadow core, right, I can take this and essentially create kind of the look of a texture as I go around here. When I'm doing these, I do like to go back and forth. So, oh yeah, I forgot this 13 is drying out. Jumping back to the 13 here, kind of hit this, scrub it, create that blend, and back to the 13. Okay. The marker paper does get a little bit of juiciness or saturation happening as you draw. So it kind of helps with the blends as you're going back and forth. And now I can jump to the 15. And continue building that shadow core. One thing that's helpful as well is taking your sketch and squinting at it as you draw. And squinting at it's going to reduce the detail and complexity of what you see and allow you to focus on the value on this side. As I squint and look at it, I'm like, no, it's not dark enough. So I need to enhance the shadow core right through there. I really wish this wasn't drying up, or rather that I had some ink for it, but just continue to work this blend. Here I've got this shadow core, or this reflective element, right? I'm trying to make sure it lines up well with, you know, what I'm doing here with the shadow core. So just a little light touch on the darkest value here. Normally I'll use 3 values, but for this one I'm using 4 values of marker. There is no hard rule on how many values of markers you use. It just depends on what you're doing, okay, and your shading and so forth. Notice I'm not shading all the way to the edge, right? I'm trying to maintain a little bit of rim light, or what you might consider to be reflected light, just on these edges, okay? As you go through your day, I want you guys to keep your eyes open and look for examples in real life of some of these things. Take a close look at curved surfaces, see how the light moves on those surfaces, okay? And that's going to tell you a lot, I think, about, or as I usually say, draw from observation. So we pull from observation, but also practice drawing from observation. Draw real things. See if you can come up with a symbolic representation of those things. And it's going to help you. It's crazy how different the color looks on Zoom here. Okay, it's more of a blue-green. But yeah, draw from observation so that you can then draw from imagination, right? That's going to help you out. All right, so there's my bottom portion. So now I'm going to do, I think, the chrome and this gray section. Gray section in the middle here, I'm just going to keep it somewhat neutral. You know, maybe there's some sort of grip thing here I can draw in, and then fill this in as well. As far as the direction on your marker, it really just depends on what surface quality you're trying to show, or perhaps finish, right? A little bit of shadow here. And I'll just finish that out. This is all with the same markers. So if I need to bring out some detail or something, I can jump to my Cool Gray 7. And use that to just push the contrast a little bit in those areas. So now on the chrome, again, I have to think, okay, there's a light here. There's something happening here. And I can pull from what I did down here. So this is a little bit, it's shinier than our plastic, right? But it's not necessarily chrome. And then on this corner as well, I'm gonna have some nice contrast. Okay. And perhaps a little bit over here. Something like that. But I'm going to go even darker, and also need to create a little bit of gradient. So depending on the proximity of the light, right? So I drew this just as an example of, hey, maybe there's a light fixture or something here. I'm going to make my gradient like so. Just create a nice little marker gradient right there. And again, on this side, depending on the proximity of the light, right, or where that light's coming from, I may have something like that happening. Just depends on your scene, what you're doing, and what you're trying to communicate. Okay. Let's use a C2 just to finish off this blend, like so. So now I've got a nice highlight, somewhat consistent with this glossy surface, but we're going to sharpen that up just a little bit as well. So at this point, you can take a nice black marker if you're doing chrome, for example, because essentially it's just a mirror, right? So whatever's standing or situated here, right, it's going to get reflected in. Might have things here, for example. I just decided to make these shiny. And we can just do our outline as well. So on something like this, right, we're going to have holes. And something like Photoshop's better for this, but in terms of like quickly communicating a concept, we can just put a series of holes on, right? Whether they're the right size or not. Or if you're counting the number. Sometimes when I do this, I'll count the number, but that's only when I'm being paid for like a crazy illustration. And then at this point, we can use something like a white pen. So again, lights against darks, right? Those contrast hits are going to help your sketches feel more realistic. And just on all of these little edges, maybe there's a little glint of a highlight. Just like that. This is a Posca pen, just a white paint pen. You can also do this with gouache if you have it. But all that information, like I said, is in that link I shared. Or if you go to sketchday.com, there's a section that says resources, and it'll give you some information on that. All right, so sometimes in Chrome too, you'll get, well, you don't know, but a little bit of little hits of white or something else that's kind of reflecting in, so we can add that if we want to. And then the last step would be line weight, and then just finalizing our texture, things like that. So in this case, maybe where I had that marker line, we can add just a couple sketch lines here just to add some clarity. A couple dots on this gray texture. Right, maybe a little arrow or some text for the on-off position. We can add some sort of logo on the chrome if that's something we wanted to do. Kind of hate this part break now, but since this is a part break, I'm gonna make this line a little heavier, and then I'll come in with a little bit of white on this edge as a light catching edge. Again, not exactly a marker rendering, but more of a marker sketch here. Marker rendering would just mean that I'm using like French curves and Frisket and all that old stuff that no one uses anymore. And some of you might go, what are you talking about? Oh, I did say I'd use the airbrush on this, but I didn't, so my bad. So now, another reason I like these pens is I can hit the same line a couple times and get a nice thicker line. It also doesn't bleed with marker, so something else I appreciate. Okay, so continuing with and then we'll wrap up here, continuing with the dynamics of the sketch itself. A couple of things. So the line weight to one side or the other, I guess I did on the wrong side this time, but usually I like to have the line weight be heavier on the side of the sketch that's away from the light. So I did this incorrectly, but normally I would make, say, for example, these lines a little bit heavier than the lines on this side. And that's going to give your sketch some dynamic. The other thing you can do, I have that background here. If I want, I could just fill this in. You could use a color if you want as well, but I'll just use black. In this instance, it's just a thick black marker that I have and love. And if I'm really careful, I can just leave a little bit of white there. That's going to help separate it from the background as well. Like so. All right. And if we want, we can add a little bit of a shadow on the sketch. Just using a simple ellipse here in this case to help it feel grounded and a part of the page. All right. So that's how I do the shaver. I do want to show you and point out a couple of things. Let's bring it back to those initial drawings I did for you. So as I think about lighting surfaces, all of that good stuff, I thought the meeting was over because I moved the screen from one screen to another. I was like, but essentially the building blocks of our form here, right? And I'm going to simplify this a bit. Actually, let's use a different color. This is without any transition or anything. So the building blocks of our form are really these pieces. Okay, and as you do this, it's going to help you understand, oh, okay, well, this is going to be my one surface. Here, I know I'm going to have, shadow core and highlight. Okay, this one would have a highlight like this one like this. So what if we just connect these and this one? Okay, well, this line actually comes in a bit, right? So as you do this, it makes it really easy. Oh, and then we have these guys I forgot about. It makes it really easy to think about your lighting and how you would apply that marker. But if you can break it down, right, break down those forms, whether it's a person, whether it's nature, like there's a lot of stuff you can do if you can understand those basic building blocks. So like I said in the beginning, I wanted to bring it back to the basics for you guys because all of this stuff translates into understanding how to apply value, tone, perspective, all that stuff. David says, why wouldn't you just use a computer? Because there's going to be instances in your career, if not already, where you're going to be asked to draw something and you're not going to have a computer. And I don't like the idea personally of not being able to execute and express my ideas in a compelling way. All right. So that's just myself. To each their own. There's amazing tools out there now that basically make it so you don't even need to know perspective. Um, but there are going to be times where understanding how light works, how things work, are going to help you. So all of this could translate to digital rendering and sketching in terms of how you apply those techniques. But I just wanted to show you some marker drawing to say, hey, you can actually do some cool stuff using your markers and your pens. All right. Well, thanks, guys. It's been fun. Hopefully you were able to pick up some good stuff. I'll hand it back to Jack to wrap things up.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate having you. Thank you so much to everyone who was able to attend. We really hope this helped out a lot. We're trying to keep on doing these events. I know times are tough right now, but we have amazing technology that we can use to have someone like Spencer give us an amazing workshop. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks. And I know we didn't have a ton of time to cover everything, so definitely, if you haven't yet, hit up my YouTube. I've got over 400 videos that probably and likely answer a lot of questions you might have. So feel free to peruse that and check it out.
Yeah, definitely follow Spencer. He's absolutely amazing. If you're just starting out, or even if you're super advanced in sketching, everyone should be watching his YouTube videos. That's how I learned. That's how a lot of us are learning, I know. Thank you so much. Make sure to follow us on Instagram, IDSARIT. You can find out about more events coming up. If you are an RIT student, you should be getting emails with that as well. But if you're not, you can always ask us for Zoom links and information. And also, if you have any comments, questions, anything like that, you can always talk to us through Instagram. And I think that's it. I'm so happy that everyone was able to make it here. Thank you so much. I know we went over time a bit, Spencer, but thank you. We really appreciate having you. And I hope everyone has a great day.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Spencer. Good to
All
see you
right.
again.
Yep. Good to see you as well.
Take care.
Take care.